Hi, welcome to Discovering Exodus. We are on chapter 11, and I'm really excited to bring this chapter to you. And it's really almost like a pause before now we see the very last plague that God is going to send upon the nation of Israel, or nation of Egypt, where Egypt is going to push the nation of Israel out of their land. But what I want to do today is that we're going to take a pause and we're actually going to look at a passage in Mark 8. As we've been kind of traveling through each of these chapters, these questions that Jesus asks the disciples keep coming up in my heart. So I'm just bringing them today since we have this little pause before the final plague that God sends upon the nation of Egypt. And I really feel like it's connected to what we're going to see with the Israelites as they wander through the desert and their attitude of grumbling and complaining. When I taught a Bible study on the tabernacle, one of the gals in our study had said that when she was reading about Israel to her grandchildren, her grandkids were like, well, we should call them the Miserableites because they were so miserable all the time. And that has stuck with me. In verse 9 of chapter 11, it says, the Lord had said to Moses, Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt. What we know is God's name. God's name will be the most famous in all of the earth. And so in this time in history, God is going to use these signs and wonders that Israel has experienced, how they have watched every plague come forth. They have watched God in his faithfulness saying what he is going to do, and there's a follow through. He's going to do it, and he does it. So what I want to do is we're going to flip to Mark 8, and if you want to flip that there, I'm going to just kind of do a little synopsis of what's happening and then hit these questions that Jesus asks. That's really where I want to land today. So Mark 8 is the feeding of the 4,000. And this is a time where Jesus says, I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they'll collapse on the way because some of them have come a really long distance. And so his disciples say, well, where in this remote place could anyone get enough bread to feed them? And then Jesus, in his response of miraculous provision, says, how many loaves do you have? 7, they replied. And so he told the crowd to sit down. So he multiplies the loaves and feeds all of the people that have been listening to him. And again, they collect 7 basketfuls of broken pieces afterwards. They now get a time together where they're in the boat and they're going to be going back across the sea. And they're having a discussion. The disciples are having a discussion. And they discuss the idea that in verse 14 of chapter 8 it says the disciples had forgotten to bring bread except the 1 loaf that they had with them in the boat. And Jesus warns them, be careful, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. And they discuss this with one another. Is it because we have no bread? And aware of their discussions, verse 17, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? This was the other time that this miracle happened. 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 basketfuls for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 7, they answered. And then Jesus said to them, do you still not understand? So we have some questions here that I feel like are very appropriate for our friends, the Israelites, as we have this pause before that final plague. And what Jesus is doing here is he's really exposing some of the fractures that the disciples do not have full agreement with who he is, with what he's done, with his ways. And so they're in the boat and they're talking about having no bread. I just feel like I totally relate to them. And Jesus is saying, really, his question, why are you talking about having no bread? These questions now are going to reveal how their thinking is different than Jesus. And so even for the Israelites, they, in this period, they have been under the oppression of the Egyptian rulers, the Egyptian people. When God pulls them into the wilderness, his desire, and we'll see this, is that they would be his people. And they're going to get a whole new government. They're going to get a whole new way of relating with God. They're going to get a healthcare system. Like all of those laws that are put into place that God gives them are for their good, and really how to relate to God and how to relate with one another. But what happens, as we know, because we know the story, we know all about those Israelites, even though we're not there yet, is that they miss it. And so I feel like the questions that God could be asking the Israelites are the same questions that Jesus is asking his disciples. So we're going to just take those one by one. And then I want you to be thinking about that just even in your own life, and how, I'm going to just kind of wrap up then with what I feel like the call is to us as his chosen ones, just as Israel is the firstborn chosen by God. So when he's saying, why are you talking about having no bread in this Mark 8? What he's really saying is, why are you having these discussions, this reasoning that starts with what you don't have? Why are you doing that? You're thinking about lack. Like they're sitting with Jesus, the miracle worker, sitting in the boat with them, and their questions go to, they're talking about, oh man, we didn't bring any bread. Is that why he's talking about the yeast? Like their whole thinking is in a completely different plane. And then his next question is, do you still not see or understand? They have been walking with him for some time. They have seen the miracles that Jesus has done. They've seen the way that Jesus relates with people. They're watching him. They see how he goes off and meets with the Father. They're seeing a whole different lifestyle. And Jesus is saying, do you still not understand what I am all about? I've invited you into this place of intimacy. What is going on in your heart? What's going on in your thinking? And then he says, is your heart still hardened? We looked at that last week with Pharaoh's hardened heart. And we see it in Exodus 11. It says again, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. And that hardness of heart, what can happen is it just leads to complacency. It leads to rebellion. It leads to apathy. It's keeping those walls in your heart. And Jesus is saying, he's just kind of showing what those fractures are, showing where there are disagreements with the aligning of the kingdom of heaven. Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? They've been with him. Open your eyes and see. There's a whole new way of thinking that they should be walking in. Our Israelite friends that we'll walk with into the wilderness, they should have they have experienced the way that God's power has come, and how God has shown himself high and above every other god, even the ruler Pharaoh, the officials, the magicians. No one compares to God. So what they have seen and what they've experienced is completely miraculous, and nothing like that had ever happened yet on the earth. And so God could be asking them those same questions. Really pay attention. Keep your eyes focused. Keep your ears listening to me, so that he doesn't have to say later, do you have eyes but fail to see? Do you have ears but fail to hear? And then he asked the question, Jesus asked, don't you remember? We activate our hearing and our seeing, this fresh way, this kingdom way of hearing and seeing, by reviewing what God has done, his supernatural provision, his supernatural activity. We need to meditate on who he is, and we need to remember. That is what sets us on a whole new way of thinking. It aligns our thinking with kingdom thinking. And then he asked the disciples about these specific miracles of provision that they've witnessed. When I broke the 5 loaves, how many basketfuls did you pick up? And when I broke the 7 loaves, how many basketfuls did you pick up? He's looking for their history with him to be the lens that they would see every present situation. So there should be this whole new level, and I don't know if that's the right word, but a whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of seeing, a whole new way of hearing. When the Israelites are set free out of the land of Egypt, their way of thinking, their way of seeing, their way of hearing should be completely different because of what they've experienced. So he's looking at his disciples and saying, okay, the history that we have, this is now the lens that I want you to view everything. Know who I am. And it's the same with God, with the Israelites. Now my history that I'm building with you, and he's going to continue to build a rich history with them of his faithfulness, of his covenant, of his love, of his tender mercy, of his healing, of his miraculous provision. That history should now be, that's now the lens that they should be seeing, the way that they should be hearing everything that they have in their present situation. We need to be so impacted. We need to be so impacted by what we experience with God that anything that's going on in our current situation would be, you know what? We wouldn't let the present or the normal or the natural of what we're experiencing determine what we believe about God, what we believe that he's going to do. Instead, we have this history with him that says God did it before and he's going to do it again. And so that is to be that's our level, that's the place we stand on. And so knowing and experiencing his power and his love and all of the ways that we've seen him provide for us in his amazing faithfulness to us, that is the lens that we should view everything in our present situation. So here's what we want to do. 3 things. We want to steward the testimonies, his testimonies in our lives. Steward them, remember them, write them down. We want to steward his presence, being aware of his presence around us, being aware that he is with us, that he is near. And then the 3rd thing we want to steward is his ways. We want to know him. We want to know his ways, not just what he does for us, but the ways of his heart. And we'll see this. Moses knew his ways. All the Israelites knew was all the stuff that God did. And we want to know the ways of his heart. We don't want to be just all about the miracles, which that's what he does because he's God and he loves us. But we want to study the ways of his heart, the things that he is excited about, the ways that he has moved in our own lives, the ways that he has drawn us into relationship. So as we leave today, we steward his testimonies, share with one another that this is our lens that we're viewing everything from. The way that he's been in our life, the way that he's shown himself to be faithful, the way that he's shown up in miraculous ways, that is where we stand. That is how we view any present situation. We steward his ways, we steward the testimonies, and we steward his presence. All right, that's it for today, and I'll see you in chapter 12.